Welcome to this video on two-way tables. By the end of this video, you should be able to determine the joint, marginal, and conditional frequencies from a two-way table and answer real-world problems about two-way tables. Okay, so a two-way table is a way that frequencies or counts are shown as they relate to two different variables. The data from one sample is shown as it relates to the data from two other categories. Okay, so we can use a two-way table to determine a relative frequency, which is a percentage. So when we start talking about percentages, we're really talking about relative frequencies. There's three particular kinds of relative frequency we're going to talk about: joint relative frequency, marginal relative frequency, and conditional relative frequency. So let's start with the joint relative frequency. Joint relative frequency is the ratio, or you're going to divide the fraction of a category cell and the total number of data values. So here's what it means. We've got of all the students. So when they say of all the students, they're talking about this grand total, meaning of all of these 119 students. So we're going to divide out of all of those 119 students, what percentage are male and band. Okay, so this is a joint relative frequency. So you're going to take where the cells cross, male and band, and divide it by the grand total. Okay, because male and band, that satisfies both. So this is going to be 12 divided by 119, and when you use your calculator, you get 0.10 times 100 to take it into percent gives you 10%. So 10% of all the students talked to were males and band. Okay, let's try another joint relative frequency. So when they say the category cell, they're talking about where the two categories cross. Of the students surveyed, what percentage are female and in the yearbook? So of the students surveyed still means this grand total of 119. So out of these 119 people, what percentage are female and yearbook? So we want female and yearbook, which happens right there with these 7 people. So that's going to be our denominator. No, sorry, our numerator. So 7 divided by 119 gives us 0.058. And when you multiply that by 100, that's going to equal 5.8%. So that's a joint relative frequency. You're going to take a cell where the two cells cross and divide it by the grand total. Okay. Another kind of relative frequency that we want to discuss is called a marginal relative frequency. So the marginal relative frequency is a ratio of the category total and the total number of data values. So it's called marginal because the numbers you're going to get, the category totals, come into the margin of the table. Okay, so we're going to be dividing by this 119 again. It's out of all of the students talked to. Okay, and so what is the probability that a randomly selected student is in the band? So we want to know out of all of these 119 people, what percentage are in band? Well, here's band. And we want to go to the band total. The total's in the margin. That's going to be our numerator, the 33. So we're going to say 33 divided by 119. You calculate that out, you get 0.277. Multiply that by 100, and you get 27.7%. All right, let's try another marginal frequency. So of all the students surveyed, so that means out of those 119 people, what percentage are female? So that means look for the female total, which is right there, and that's our numerator. So 48 out of the 119 people surveyed were female. When we calculate that out, we get 0.403, which is 40.3%. Okay, so those are pretty straightforward. The next one is not any harder. You just got to pay attention to the language. Let's flip this over. So the last relative frequency that we want to discuss is the conditional relative frequency. So now the conditional relative frequency says the category cell where the two cells cross divided by the category total. So we're not going to be using this 119. We're going to use one of these margin totals for a category. So a condition is something that has to be met before you do your division. So let's look. So this says of the males. That means we're only talking about males. So we want to go find how many males are there. So of these 71 males, okay, so we're not talking about 119 because that includes females. So of these 71 males, what is the probability they are in yearbook? So we're going to want male in yearbook. So it's going to be 28 divided by 71. And when you calculate that out, you're going to get 0.394, which equals 39.4%. Okay. So what you're usually going to see is there's going to be some words that tell you the category that you're dividing by, that we only are talking about this particular group. If it's a joint or marginal relative frequency, it will say a randomly selected student or out of all of the students, talking about out of everybody. But once they narrow you down to a category, that is a conditional, and you're going to have to divide by that category total. So let's try this again. What percentage of the core students are females? So we're only talking about core students. We can't use the 119 because that's more than just core students. So in course, there are 32 people. So what that question is saying is of these 32 people, what percentage are female? So 32 of those 32, 17 of them are female. So when we calculate that out, we get 0.531, which is 53.1%. All right, so we're going to just kind of summarize this down to think about this. So if we have a joint frequency, these are all the different kind of relative frequencies. You're going to take, to make your fraction, your ratio, you're going to take where the categories cross, okay, and you are going to divide it by that grand total of all the whatever they're talking about. Okay, so that's how you take a joint relative frequency, where the two categories cross, divided by the grand total. A marginal frequency is you're going to take a category total and you're going to divide it by the grand total. So your grand total is everybody, okay? You're going to take a category total from the margin and divide it by the grand total. Now your conditional relative frequency, that's when we're not talking about everybody. We're only talking about a particular category. So you're going to end up dividing by the category total. And the number that's going to go on top will be where the categories cross. Alright, so hopefully that will kind of help you distinguish. For joint and marginal frequencies, you're always going to divide by this grand total. For conditional, you have to use the particular group that they're asking about and then put the joint frequency on top where the two categories cross. Alright, so let's try some of this, get a feel for it. So the first thing we need to do is we need to finish our table. We do not have all of our numbers here. So using the calculator, I'm going to get you started and then you can pause the video to finish filling it in. We have 1,180 students and I know 1,064 of them are non-varsity. So if I subtract that, I know how much the varsity is, which means there's 116 because 116 plus 1,064 is 1,180. You'll notice 51 plus 257 is 308. Okay, so the same idea. What some number plus 276 is 312. So go ahead and pause the video, try filling this out, and come back when you've finished. Alright, so let's go ahead and give this a try. A lot of times they're not going to tell you what kind of relative frequency that you're searching for, whether it's joint, marginal, or conditional. They'll just ask you for it, or sometimes they'll just say relative frequency to talk about any of them. So you don't always know ahead of time where you're really looking for the numbers. So our first example, what percentage of the students surveyed are freshmen and play a varsity sport? So it says of the students surveyed. That means out of all of the students. So that's 1,180 out of those 1,180 students. How many of them are freshmen and play a varsity sport? So I'm going to go to freshmen and varsity, and there's 7 of them, of the 1,180 students. So when we use our calculator and we divide 7 divided by 1,180, we get 0.006, which when you multiply that by 100 gives you 0.6%. Very little, less than 1% are freshmen that play for the varsity, is what that's telling us. So that would have been a joint relative frequency because we took a joint number divided by the grand total. So we'll identify that as a joint. Okay. Let us go ahead and then now, what is the probability of a randomly selected student is a sophomore? They said randomly selected student, that means out of everybody. So of these 1,180 people, what's the probability that they're a sophomore? Sophomores are here, and there are 284 of them. When you calculate that out, you should get 0.241, which is 24.1%. Now, the 284 divided by this grand total, the 284 is in the margin, so this is a marginal frequency. So it's really just naming where did your numbers come from. Okay, let's look at number 3. Given that the student is a senior, that means we're only talking about seniors. So we've got to use the senior total. So I'm going to go to seniors. Out of these 308 people, what is the probability they play a non-varsity sport? So of these 308, so I can only look in this column, non-varsity is 257 of the 308. When you calculate that out, 257 divided by 308, you get 0.834, which is 83.4%. So the majority of the seniors don't play a varsity sport. Now I got those numbers. I did not use the grand total. I used a category total because they only told me about seniors. So I could only look at the seniors. That makes this conditional. All right. And our last example. What percentage of students are seniors and play a non-varsity sport? So they say what percentage of students? That means out of everybody. That's talking about all the students. So that's the 1,180. So you know it can't be conditional because we didn't narrow it down to a particular group. It's going to be either joint or marginal. So they want to know seniors and play a non-varsity sport. So they're looking for where seniors cross non-varsity, okay, which is at 257. That is where the two categories cross. That's going to make that a joint relative frequency. Okay, let's go ahead and finish calculating that out. 257 divided by 1,180 equals 0.218, which is 21.8%. Hopefully that was helpful. See you in class.